The Royal Lodge, the 30-room residence of Prince Andrew and his ex-wife Sarah Ferguson, has sparked public outrage over its lavish grandeur and the prince's right to live in such splendor on a crown estate property.
The gates of Royal Lodge have been sealed shut. The lights inside the 30-room Windsor mansion are finally dark, and the woman who spent 2 decades living rent-free inside one of Britain's most prestigious royal estates has vanished, not with a farewell, not with a statement, not with so much as a wave goodbye. She was simply gone. This is the story of Sarah Ferguson's final, humiliating chapter at Royal Lodge. A story about a woman who had everything: a royal title, a royal mansion, royal protection, and lost it all. Not in a single dramatic moment, but in a slow, grinding, deeply public unraveling that has left her without a home, without a brand, without a title, and without a country to call her own. And the truly shocking part? The royal family saw this coming long before the rest of us did. So the question you have to ask yourself right now is this: how does a woman who lived for 20 years inside a Windsor mansion end up effectively homeless at 66? How does someone who called herself a member of the royal tripod, her word, end up smuggled out of a royal estate under the cover of darkness, her face hidden, her destination unknown? Stay with us, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how it happened, and why the palace's silence throughout all of this speaks louder than any statement they could have made. The life most people can only dream about. To understand how far Sarah Ferguson has fallen, you first have to understand the extraordinary life she was living. Royal Lodge is not a holiday cottage. It is not a modest flat tucked away somewhere in Windsor. It is a 30-room mansion sitting deep inside Windsor Great Park.
The 30-room Royal Lodge, nestled in the lush 40-hectare Windsor Great Park.
One of the most exclusive and historic private estates in the United Kingdom. The grounds are sweeping. The history is royal. The Queen Mother herself once called it home. By any standard, by every standard, Royal Lodge is among the most coveted addresses in Britain, and Sarah Ferguson lived there for free. Her ex-husband, Prince Andrew, had been granted a 75-year lease on the property at a rent so low it was essentially symbolic, a financial arrangement that effectively handed one of the Crown's finest residences to a disgraced royal at almost no cost to him and certainly no cost to her. Think about that. A 75-year lease on a 30-room mansion on the grounds of Windsor Castle for next to nothing. And when Ferguson moved back in around 2008, more than a decade after her 1996 divorce from Andrew.
Although the former Duke and Duchess of York divorced in 1996, they remained on friendly terms.
She wasn't paying a penny. Not for the heating, not for the maintenance, not for the staff. The Crown, through its various mechanisms, picked up the bill. A bill that, for any ordinary person, would have been staggering. She lived this way for over 15 years after her marriage ended. A divorced woman, no longer a working royal, no longer technically a duchess in any active sense. And yet there she was, waking up every morning inside a Windsor mansion, walking those famous grounds, living what she herself acknowledged was a life most people could only dream of. She justified it through what she called the tripod: herself, Andrew, and their shared role as parents to Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie. It was a compelling narrative. 2 people who loved each other enough to remain friends, practical enough to share a home, devoted enough to their daughters to put family first. She spoke about it warmly in interviews, making it sound almost noble. But here's the question that nobody at the time was asking loudly enough. Was any of that the whole truth? Or was it a convenient story that allowed 2 people, one scandal-plagued former duke and one financially struggling former duchess, to hold on to a lifestyle neither could afford on their own? Because if you look at the timeline of what came next, you start to wonder whether the tripod was ever really about the children at all. The shadows behind the mansion walls. While Sarah Ferguson was giving interviews about her beautiful family arrangement at Royal Lodge, something dark was gathering in the background. Something that had been building since at least 2010, when photographs emerged of Prince Andrew visiting the home of Jeffrey Epstein, a convicted sex offender who had been imprisoned for soliciting a minor for prostitution.
For the first time ever, Prince Andrew facing the cameras to defend his friendship with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
Andrew's connection to Epstein had been a source of discomfort for the royal family for years, but discomfort became full-blown crisis in 2019, when Andrew sat down for what has since become one of the most catastrophically misjudged interviews in royal history, his BBC Newsnight interview with Emily Maitlis, the very journalist who would later reveal crucial details about what happened behind closed doors at Royal Lodge. In that interview, Andrew struggled to explain his relationship with Epstein.
All of this goes back to your friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. How did you first become friends? How did you meet?
He offered justifications that the public found baffling. He spoke about a pizza restaurant in Woking with a strange kind of pride.
Why would you remember a Pizza Express birthday and being at home?
Because going to Pizza Express in Woking is an unusual thing for me to do.
He failed, comprehensively and publicly, to show any empathy for Epstein's victims. It was a disaster, a slow-motion, nationally televised disaster. And throughout all of it, throughout every wave of the scandal, every fresh headline, every damning revelation, Sarah Ferguson stood by him. She defended him. She appeared at his side. She remained at Royal Lodge even as the pressure mounted, and the advisors around her surely must have been telling her this was not a good idea. Why? Why would a woman who had spent years building her own brand, writing children's books, supporting charities, and trying to reinvent herself as a philanthropic figure, hitch herself so completely to a man whose reputation was in freefall? The answer, as we now know, may have been because she had her own reasons to stay close, her own connections she didn't want examined too closely, her own relationship with Jeffrey Epstein that she had spent years desperately trying to keep quiet. October 2025, the day King Charles pulled the trigger. For years, the royal family had watched the situation at Royal Lodge with what sources describe as increasing frustration. Andrew was refusing to leave. Ferguson showed no sign of going anywhere. And the Epstein scandal was not going away. It was growing. Then came October 30th, 2025. Buckingham Palace issued a statement. Brief, formal, devastating in its implications. King Charles had begun the process of stripping his younger brother of all royal titles and honors.
King Charles III is seen for the first time since stripping Prince Andrew of his royal titles.
Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, no longer Prince, no longer HRH, no longer entitled to the privileges, the deference, the protections that royal status provides. The announcement included one further detail that shook observers. The lease on Royal Lodge had been terminated. Andrew must vacate the property. Read that again. Terminated. Not renegotiated. Not extended. Terminated. After 20 years, after a 75-year lease that should have protected him for decades more, the deal was done. The crown had moved, and it had moved hard. Sarah Ferguson received no mention in the announcement. Not one word. No acknowledgement that she had lived there for 15 years. No alternative arrangements offered. No grace period suggested. She was simply not part of the equation. After everything, after all those years, all that loyalty, all those interviews defending Andrew and calling herself part of the royal tripod, she was not even worth a sentence. Can you imagine what that felt like? Now here is where it gets even more interesting. Royal journalist Emily Maitlis, yes, the same Emily Maitlis who conducted that infamous 2019 interview, later claimed on her podcast that the push to remove Andrew from Royal Lodge did not come solely from King Charles. She described a meeting involving Prince William and Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie themselves, the daughters who had grown up at Royal Lodge, the daughters for whom the entire tripod arrangement had supposedly existed. According to this account, they told their father to leave, or risk losing their own royal titles. Read that back. His own daughters. We cannot independently verify every detail of that account, but what we can say is this. Even if you set aside the specifics, the outcome was clear. The family had closed ranks. Andrew was out, and Ferguson, by extension, had nowhere left to turn. The countdown begins. No home, no plan, no way out. The announcement gave Andrew and Ferguson a deadline. At first, it was reported they would need to leave by January 25th, 2026. January 25th came and went. They were still there. This is where the story shifts from political drama to something almost unbearably human. Because while Andrew at least had somewhere to go, a cottage on the Sandringham estate, Wood Farm, with 2 reception rooms and a kitchen, far humbler than Royal Lodge, but a home nonetheless. Sarah Ferguson had nothing. She had owned a townhouse in London, a £4.25 million property she purchased in 2022, a lifeline, a fallback, a home of her own. But she had sold it in 2025, leaving herself without any property to go back to. Let that sink in. She sold the one home she owned, and she did it in the same year the palace started its moves against Andrew. So where was she going to go? Her daughters could only offer temporary solutions. Princess Beatrice had a home in the Cotswolds. Princess Eugenie split her time between Portugal and Kensington Palace. Neither could offer their mother a permanent base. Neither had the room, the stability, or frankly, given what was coming, possibly the inclination to take on the problem permanently. Insiders told reporters that Ferguson had nowhere to go. One source used the word homeless. A woman who had spent 2 decades in a 30-room Windsor mansion was now, effectively, homeless. She reportedly began asking about Adelaide Cottage, the former home of Prince William and Kate.
The British royals have had their pick of lavish palaces and castles to call home, but now Prince William and his family are leaving their London mansion for a more rural cottage.
The request alarmed palace advisors, given her connection to the Epstein files.
Explosive documents in the newly released Epstein files reveal that Sarah Ferguson, former Duchess of York,
given the scrutiny over royal spending, given the ongoing questions about her own conduct, the idea of gifting her another grace and favor home was politically toxic. The answer, it seems, was no. And all the while, her professional life was collapsing around her. The empire in ruins. Sarah Ferguson had spent years after her divorce trying to build something, a brand, a career, a reason for people to pay attention to her outside of her royal connections. She wrote children's books. She fronted weight loss campaigns. She ran charities. She set up companies. In the weeks after the October 2025 announcement, all of it started to fall apart. 6 companies that she ran were in the process of being dissolved.
Well, this is a really interesting point. So Sarah Ferguson has closed down 6 businesses. A lot of them owe money, or a lot of them just had £1, for a shareholder.
6, not 1. 6 separate business ventures, each of them now winding down. Her charity, Sarah's Trust, announced it would close for the foreseeable future.
Sarah's Trust, the charity Sarah Ferguson, has announced it will close for the foreseeable future,
citing in carefully chosen language her damaged public image. Think about what it means when your own charity closes because of your reputation. When the organization you founded to do good in the world decides that your name is now more of a liability than an asset. It gets worse. Major organizations that had previously associated themselves with her, including the Teenage Cancer Trust and the British Heart Foundation, quietly removed her as patron. No press releases, no public statements. They simply erased her name from their websites and moved on. The silence was deliberate. The message was unmistakable. She was toxic, and everyone in the charitable sector knew it. Former royal aides, speaking anonymously, reportedly advised her to get a regular job, to stay out of the spotlight entirely, to accept that public redemption was not on the table. The idea that she could write a tell-all book, which had reportedly crossed her mind as a way to generate income, was ruled out. Apparently even she could see that the fallout would be catastrophic. By the time the final weeks at Royal Lodge arrived, Sarah Ferguson was a woman with no income stream, no professional platform, no title, no charity, and no home. And she was about to lose the last thing she had left, the illusion that the palace still had any use for her at all. The Epstein emails, the documents that destroyed everything. In January 2026, the United States Department of Justice released over 3 million pages of documents related to its investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. 3 million pages. Inside those documents were emails.
Today, the Department of Justice is releasing more files related to the Jeffrey Epstein case. Just this morning, the department said this release includes more than 3 million pages of documents.
And some of those emails had Sarah Ferguson's name on them. For years, Ferguson had maintained a particular story about her connection to Epstein. She called it a gigantic mistake in a 2011 interview, a single error, a lapse in judgment, the kind of thing anyone might do: meet the wrong person, accept the wrong introduction, and spend years paying for it. The emails told a different story. In messages signed by Sarah, Ferguson described Epstein as the brother I have always wished for, not an acquaintance, not a business contact, not someone she barely knew, a brother. The language is intimate, warm, deeply familiar. In another note, she wrote, "I am at your service. Just marry me." The context appears to be an offer to manage some of his properties in exchange for financial support. This was not the language of someone who had made a mistake and moved on. This was the language of someone deep in a transactional, personal relationship with one of the most dangerous men in modern history. But perhaps the most disturbing detail, and the one that shocked the public most, was a 2009 email in which Ferguson planned a lunch with Epstein in Miami and mentioned that her daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, would be joining them. In 2009, the year of Epstein's conviction for soliciting a minor for prostitution, Ferguson allegedly arranged for her daughters, then aged 21 and 19, to be in proximity to Epstein after he had already been convicted of crimes involving children. The public reaction was immediate and severe, and it gets more complicated. In 2011, 6 months after her public statement calling Epstein a gigantic mistake, there appears to be another email from Ferguson. In it, she apologizes to Epstein for having distanced herself from him publicly. She calls him a steadfast, generous, and supreme friend. She says she had been bedridden with fear about speaking out against him. Bedridden with fear about a man she publicly claimed had been merely a mistake. There were also documents suggesting Epstein had helped pay some of Ferguson's personal debts, debts that had troubled her for years and that had been a source of public embarrassment in their own right. The financial connection added a layer of complexity and desperation to the whole picture. Her spokesperson's response was minimal. Ferguson expressed regret, they said. Her thoughts were with the victims. Nobody was satisfied. Nobody was going to be satisfied. The night she slipped away. Here is the detail that makes everything stranger. Sarah Ferguson did not leave Royal Lodge with Andrew. She did not wait for the deadline. She did not make a statement. She did not say goodbye. The Daily Mail reported that the last confirmed sighting of Sarah Ferguson at Royal Lodge was in September 2025, months before the official deadline, months before Andrew's departure, months before the Epstein documents dropped and the world caved in around her. She was seen getting into a car. Her face was turned away from cameras. Her destination was not disclosed, and she did not come back. Think about the timing. This was September 2025. The same month King Charles was reportedly preparing the October announcement stripping Andrew of his titles. Was it a coincidence that Ferguson vanished just weeks before the palace made its move? Did she know what was coming? Had someone warned her? Or had she simply read the writing on the wall and decided to get out before the public humiliation became completely inescapable? Her last social media post was also from September 2025, a post honoring the anniversary of September 11th. After that, silence. No posts, no appearances, no interviews, no royal events, nothing. Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York, had effectively erased herself from public life. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. And on the night of February 3, 2026, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor finally departed Royal Lodge alone.
The man formerly known as Prince Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, has now moved out of the Royal Lodge. This is a significant move. He
left under cover of darkness. No farewell gathering, no palace statement, no photographs. After 20 years in one of Britain's finest royal addresses, he slipped quietly away to Wood Farm, a modest cottage with 2 reception rooms and a kitchen, 2 miles from Sandringham House. His world had shrunk to a fraction of what it once was. Royal commentator Jenny Bond didn't mince words. She described the move to Norfolk not as a change of address, but as a formal exile. And she was right, because exiles don't get farewell parties. They don't get acknowledgement. They simply disappear. The arrest on his birthday. If Andrew's departure from Royal Lodge felt like the end of an era, what happened next felt like something out of a political thriller. On February 19, 2026, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was arrested. It was his 66th birthday. Thames Valley Police arrived at his temporary home on the Sandringham estate.
Returning to our breaking news now from the UK. Let's go live to Ben Downey in London. Ben, police have arrested Andrew Mountbatten Windsor.
and took him into custody on suspicion of misconduct in public office. The specific allegation was serious, that while serving as the UK's special representative for international trade and investment, Andrew had shared sensitive trade documents with Jeffrey Epstein. If convicted, he could face a lifetime in prison. He was held at Elston Police Station for approximately 11 hours before being released without charge, meaning the investigation is ongoing. The arrest itself, however, already made history. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor became the first senior British royal to be arrested in modern times.
Start with breaking news about Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. The BBC understands that he has been arrested on suspicion of misconduct.
Some commentators reached back nearly 4 centuries to King Charles I to find a comparable moment in royal history. King Charles issued a brief statement expressing his deepest concern. Beatrice and Eugenie chose not to comment. The palace said nothing further. And Sarah Ferguson? She was nowhere near Norfolk. Reports placed her in the French Alps visiting friends. Then in the United Arab Emirates. She was spotted at the Art Basel Fair in Doha, Qatar, attending with Princess Eugenie, who was working as a director at a gallery there. Think about the optics. Her ex-husband is being arrested in Norfolk. The royal lodge they shared for 20 years stands empty, and she is at an art fair in Qatar. Legal sources suggested that when, and if, she returned to the UK, Thames Valley Police might want to speak with her about her connections to Andrew and her own documented ties to Epstein. One royal expert speaking to Fox News Digital described the actions of both Andrew and Ferguson as shameful and suggested she consider leaving the UK. Whether that was hyperbole or a genuine signal, nobody could quite say. What observers did note was this: the UAE has a history of offering refuge to prominent European figures navigating legal difficulties. It is not an extradition country in the traditional sense. Whether Ferguson's presence in the Gulf was strategic or coincidental, the speculation was inevitable. A woman with no home, no brand, no title. What comes next? So here we are. Spring 2026, and this is where Sarah Ferguson stands. She has no permanent home. Royal Lodge is closed to her. The London townhouse is sold. Her daughters can offer her a bed but not a life. She has reportedly asked for Adelaide Cottage. The palace has reportedly said no. She has no professional platform. 6 dissolved companies. A closed charity. Major organizations that once backed her have cut ties. Former aides are telling her privately to get a regular job. She has no royal title in any meaningful active sense, no HRH, no official duties, no standing to leverage for income or influence. She is 66 years old, linked to one of the most damaging scandals in modern British royal history, and she is being advised by those closest to her that public redemption is simply not available to her at this time. And yet, and this is perhaps the most fascinating and troubling detail of all, she reportedly still believes she deserves a royal residence. Sources say she has been comparing herself to Princess Diana, arguing that she is owed the same kind of grace and favor treatment that other royals have received. Former aides find this baffling. The palace finds it politically impossible. Because Diana, whatever the controversies of her own life, was never connected to Jeffrey Epstein. Diana was never named in Department of Justice documents. Diana never wrote emails calling a convicted sex offender her brother. The comparison doesn't hold, and the palace knows it. Here is the broader question that everyone following this story has to sit with. How much of Sarah Ferguson's fate was the result of bad choices, and how much of it was the inevitable consequence of choosing to orbit a man whose own choices were catastrophic? Because she did choose, repeatedly and consciously, to stay at Royal Lodge. She chose to stand by Andrew through years of scandal. She chose, apparently, to maintain a relationship with Epstein that went far beyond what she ever publicly acknowledged. She chose to sell the London property that could have given her independence. Every one of those choices made sense in the moment, perhaps. Every one of those choices contributed to where she is today. The silence of the palace, and what it reveals. There is one final thing worth examining in all of this, and that is what the royal family has not said. When King Charles stripped Andrew of his titles, there was no mention of Ferguson. When Andrew left Royal Lodge in the dark, there was no palace statement. When Andrew was arrested, the official response was a single sentence of deepest concern. When Ferguson vanished from public life, Nobody in the palace acknowledged her absence. The silence is not an accident. In royal communications, silence is a strategy. And the strategy here has been consistent. Sarah Ferguson is to be treated as if she barely exists. No acknowledgement, no support, no criticism, nothing. Because any statement about Ferguson, any statement at all, would require the palace to engage with questions it cannot answer cleanly. Questions about what they knew and when they knew it. Questions about why they allowed her to live at Royal Lodge for 15 years after the divorce. Questions about whether the co-parenting arrangement was ever really about the children, or whether it was a convenient cover for a deeper dependency. Questions about the Epstein connection and whether anyone inside the palace was aware of the extent of her relationship with him. The silence says, "We are done with this. We are moving forward. This chapter is closed." But for Sarah Ferguson, the chapter is far from closed. Because wherever she is right now, in the Gulf, in the Alps, in a friend's spare room somewhere in Europe, she is carrying with her the weight of everything that happened inside those 30 rooms. She is carrying the emails, the documents, the history. Royal Lodge has been emptied. The lease has been terminated. The lights are off. But the story of what happened inside those walls, and what it says about power, privilege, loyalty, and the price of proximity to dangerous men, is not going away. Final thoughts. The fall of Fergie. Sarah Ferguson arrived at Royal Lodge as a woman who had been through the most public kind of humiliation, a divorce from a prince, played out in front of the entire world. She built a life there on the foundations of co-parenting, loyalty, and what she called the strength of the tripod. For years, it worked. For years, she had a home, a platform, a reason to be photographed and interviewed and taken seriously. And then, slowly and then all at once, it all came undone. The Epstein scandal took Andrew's career first, then his title, then his home. And in the process, it took Ferguson's too. Not in a single dramatic event, not in one decisive moment, but in a grinding, relentless series of revelations and consequences that stripped away everything she had built, or borrowed, over 2 decades. Her final hours at Royal Lodge were not captured on camera. There was no farewell, no ceremony. She was driven away in a car with her face hidden, and the gates closed behind her. And that was the end. The woman who once called herself part of a royal tripod left alone, in silence, in the dark. And the palace? The palace moved on without missing a beat. So ask yourself this. In the months and years to come, will Sarah Ferguson find a way back? Will she find a new platform, a new story, a new version of herself that the public is willing to accept? Or has the damage from the Epstein documents, the emails, the financial ties, the proximity to the worst things Andrew is accused of, made that impossible? Because history tells us that people do recover from scandal. History also tells us that some connections are simply too close, some documents too damaging, some revelations too stark for a clean return. Where Sarah Ferguson goes from here, literally and figuratively, is one of the most genuinely unresolved stories in the British royal world right now. The mansion is empty, the gates are locked, and Fergie has vanished into the darkness. What do you think? Do you believe she deserves another chance? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you've been following this story, make sure to subscribe, because this is far from over.